congrats on the new record, Kinetic, out on April 9th, right? On Outside In?
Correct. Yeah, and thank you very much.
Now, what was this is your debut album with your jazz orchestra, yeah?
Yeah, debut big band album.
Okay, sure. And what was the mindset as you were collecting these tunes? Are these pieces that you've had for a long time? Are they pieces that you played a lot? Were you writing a lot of new stuff, or what was sort of the mindset behind the whole album?
We had a regular gig at the Django for a monthly thing for about 2 years. So leading up to the recording, those the songs on the record are a snapshot of the music and the band itself as it developed over the course of those 2 years during the residency at the Django. And we recorded it in January of 2019. We had planned on releasing it in 2020. We had a string of release shows, Vitello's in LA featuring Jane Monheit. We were going to play at Birdland featuring Jaleel Shah. We had the Blue Note lined up. We had a number of shows that were going to be used as release gigs. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a couple months. Like, we're going to just be a little bit shaky, and then we're going to make it out to the other side. And then, like everybody else, it was like, what, this isn't a couple of months. This is a long haul. We're in it for who knows how long. And I eventually just made the decision, the time is here. Like, the music's ready. It's mixed. It's mastered. It's time to put it out. So, it feels like a year later than, I feel that the music has even since that album developed, and I've been working on a lot of new stuff that as soon as I'm able to get back into the recording studio, we are going to record and put out. And, that's kind of the idea behind the title of the record as well, Kinetic, just a lot of built up energy, waiting to be released. And that's kind of a snapshot of the story.
Great. Perfect timing to at least record it. I mean, it's a big deal, especially I think in this day and age, to be able to rehearse, play with a band over and over and have a residency like that and get the music tight and get the musicians comfortable with the music and everything. And then you picked unintentionally a good time to get that music down, because it could have been a couple months later and you would have been another year before you could even record it.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, no, definitely worked out.
So it was scheduled for 2020, but it came out 2021. You pushed it back a little bit so that, and yeah, we've all been in this kind of wild zone for a little while. Yeah. Feels like it's coming back slowly but surely.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we never know. But that's, the funny thing too, of course, is that everybody did the same thing, which is like, yeah, we'll be in this for a week. And then it became 2 weeks, and then it became, a year. But
yeah, who knew? Literally, who knew?
Yeah, no. What are you going to do? So the title track, Kinetic, was that something that you had written before, and then you were like, this is going to be the title track of the album, or did the concept for the record and that particular piece coincide?
So that piece, actually, I wrote that for Ulysses, the drummer who's featured on that track. We had a gig slated for Minton's with a big band a while ago, years ago, actually. And Ulysses was the person in charge of booking that venue at that time. Mm-hmm. And just before the gig happened, the venue went under. And so it never happened. But I wrote that piece, with the hopes that Ulysses would be there. And, I was going to ask him to sit in on the piece, and so I wrote something that I felt like fit his musical personality. And so it was originally called Use Blues. Use Blues. Mm-hmm. And the piece wound up being, it just wound up feeling like it had so much energy that I used it as an opener at every single show that I gave since I wrote it.
Sure.
And so I knew that I wanted to start the record with it. Mm-hmm. I knew I wanted to have Ulysses on it. And so voila.
Sure, yeah.
He played on it. The concept of the album arose independently of that composition. Took me a while to kind of figure out what I should call it, even though conceptually it was so clear to me.
Mm-hmm.
And once I some of my songs I write and I have great titles for them right off the bat, or whatever, not great, but working titles.
Sure, right, yeah.
Titles that actually work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have placeholder titles, working titles.
Sure.
And so once I realized that the record should be called Kinetic, that encapsulated my concept of what I thought the record was about, what I thought that I was about, the band was about at that time. I decided to rename that song to match the title of the album.
Got it. One of the things that's so interesting talking to people about their individual creative process is that everybody has such a unique approach to so many of the different components of creating music and, the just coming up with new ideas, inspiration, and the process itself and everything. And one of the things that's been kind of surprisingly controversial, and I don't think that I even would have thought about this as an important component of the music, is the titling of music, of tracks, especially with instrumental music. Like, is the point to try to convey to the listener something to be aware of in the process of listening? For some people, it feels like it's a matter of, I don't want to put some idea in the listener's mind. I want it to be a fully subjective experience or whatever. And then in other circumstances, it's like the title itself will give inspiration for what the piece is going to be. Do you think about this? Like, when you start to write a piece in your process, do you go in and say, here's a concept, here's an idea that I'd like to write a piece about, and already have a sense for this is what it's about? Or do you tend to, and it may be different every time, do you tend to do, sort of start from a purely musical standpoint and then try to feel out what that evokes?
Yeah, I think not either, but rather both.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the composition. There are times where I'll go into a writing process having something on my mind, wanting to write about it. There are times where I'll go into a writing process and be thinking about a musical concept or idea, and then I'll expand on it and explore it. And then there are times where I'll just be shedding, and something will come up, and the moment strikes, and just go from there. And in that way, I feel that in certain cases, composition is more about capitalizing on the moment of inspiration and learning how to connect with yourself when those moments do happen. We can't choose where or when or how inspiration arrives. It just sometimes does. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it before, having a deadline sometimes certainly helps. Just knowing that you have to have a certain amount of music written for a certain instrumentation by a certain date.
Sure.
But in terms of composition, I think that the titling of songs has the ability to both be a primary or a secondary thing. Mm-hmm. A certain amount of fluidity there.
Sure. Now, do you have, let's say, a routine, an approach to writing, or is it a matter of mostly sort of, I don't want to say, maybe waiting for inspiration to come?
I would rephrase that and say trusting that inspiration will come.
Okay.
And then knowing, and then learning still how to recognize how that inspiration can present itself. Whether it's in terms of an emotion, whether it's in terms of a musical idea or a concept, or just a melody or whatever, if the inspiration is, it presents in a number of ways. And, the more that I write, the more I think that music just inspires more music. Mm-hmm. So the process looks different from composition to composition.
Sure.
Or arrangement to arrangement. Mm-hmm. I don't have a strict way of doing it. I have my score paper here. I love to write pen on paper. I don't really love to use pencil, actually.
Oh, really? That's a bold play, man.
I'd rather scratch something out than erase it.
Okay.
Like the process of turning around the pencil, erasing it, it's like, damn it, I messed up. I don't know. It just feels like it interrupts my personal process. I'd rather just like scribble it out or put it in parentheses or something like that.
Sure.
Give myself the ability to come back to it later if I'd like. So my sketches generally look like super messy.
Sure. Yeah.
But they're just sketches.
Yeah.
And,
I've always written on paper. It's always, for me, it's a tactile experience. And I think it's the same thing. It's the same thing that you're talking about, where, first of all, you can, even writing English, writing language, oftentimes I'll write something down on a piece of paper before I'll type it into a word processor or whatever. And I always felt like I was a little crazy, doing that. It feels kind of old school, but I like that tactile feel of doing it and to be able to just run through something real quick and, okay, let's try that later. Let me do something else, cross this out, and just stay with the flow of it. But of course, so often now we've got, endless technology. We can have, you could play the piano, a MIDI keyboard into, Sibelius or Finale or whatever, and create the stuff on the fly. But it's kind of amazing how many composers I talk to. It seems like a majority. It seems like I'm not crazy. Like the majority is really still into the, pencil on paper approach. Something I like about that.
Yeah, I certainly am.
So where did you record it?
Sear Sound.
Okay. And Andy Farber was the producer?
Yeah, Andy Farber was, there's actually a German word for his role, but I don't know it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like the ears in the control booth, just like saying, okay, like the saxes were out of tune there, or trumpets came in early there, or the room or the vibe in the actual recording room can be, that was a rough take, we'll do it again, and Andy can say something like, actually, that was really great. Like, you guys have the ability to move on if you want to.
Sure.
That was his role. So he's listed as a co-producer alongside Andrew Gould, the lead alto saxophonist on the record. Andrew and I have been friends for a number of years, and he's been playing lead alto in my band since, I think, like the second or third gig or something, and has literally never missed one.
Well, that's amazing.
I love playing with Andrew. I love working with Andrew, and over time we just developed a relationship of trust, and I rely heavily on his input during the musical creation process.
Sure.
And then
Now I think that
Andy from BMI, of course.
Yep. I think it's interesting. Well, let me go off on this for a second, because it's kind of I think something that I've noticed in your music is there is I would say a strong bridge between the old and the new, and the idea of like the classic big band composition and sort of a more modern approach. And I'm sure a lot of that is your approach to composition, but then a lot of it as well is the musicians in the band and the way that they choose to improvise and the way that they kind of take the, their part of the music. But I think Andrew Gould is a great example, because he seems almost like a shapeshifter in that he can create, as the lead alto player, I'm listening to it, it's almost a characteristic sound in my mind of the whole album, is like him as a lead alto player being able to sort of, like, his vibrato and his way of leading the section seems to me to really capture kind of like the whole history of the music, like the classic big band sound. But at the same time, he can take a solo and sound like it's 2021 for sure. You know what I mean? Do you think about that link between, like, let's say, a modern approach to writing or your own personal style, and to what degree your influences come from, like, the whole, tradition of swing big band music and let's say the codified tradition?
Interesting. I mean, I think you're onto something when you say the sound of the band is a bridge between the old and the new. And I certainly appreciate that. I also tend to feel that the words like modern jazz is something that's thrown around in almost an arbitrary way sometimes. And to me, the concept of time as it pertains to music is very fluid. for some reason, as a youngster, I used to associate Stravinsky as a way earlier era than Charlie Parker. And yet there's famous stories of Stravinsky sitting at Birdland and Bird noticing that Stravinsky's in the front row and quoting The Rite of Spring, and Stravinsky like, yes, in whatever Russian accent he had,
Yeah.
So like, and it's, okay, so that's the first thing that I'll say. How I'd like to kind of classify my music is something with a real focus on melody. I think that there is sometimes such a concentration on orchestration in newer big band music, or more recent big band music, that in some cases the melody itself can be secondary or can be lost in some ways. And I return to like a piece by Debussy, like it's like Del Mar or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The waves, the ocean, where even though Debussy is like constructing these beautifully interwoven orchestrational textures, that there's still like a clear melody that comes across. And I think that sometimes the old can mean like can imply a certain thing about the melody rather than it can about the harmony or the rhythm or the orchestration. And so in my music, I try and focus on the melody. I try and make sure that the melodies that I construct, that I create, have a certain familiarity to them within my own soul. And
Sure.
I think that the orchestration is oftentimes serving the melody and the harmony rather than a melody and the harmony potentially serving the orchestration.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you're writing, let's say you're going to start a new piece, do you tend to write, let's say, a lead sheet style? Like, would you create the piece and then orchestrate it, or are you arranging while you're composing?
Yeah, sometimes both. I don't have a single process that I do all the time. I'm working on a piece right now where it's, if I'm sketching, I usually work from like a 4-stave system where like the bottom 2 staves are the grand staff, and then maybe 5 staves actually. I think this one's 5 staves, and then I have 3 melody staves, basically 3 treble clefs, or sometimes one of the treble clef, the bottom one will turn into a bass clef or something like that. And then I'll be circling things and saying, okay, yeah, trumpets and mutes paired with the flutes. Something like, so the orchestration becomes a part of the writing process. And sometimes I'll just be working on like a single melody line and just trying to construct something that I think is fulfilling to me. And out of that melody, I oftentimes find that harmony emerges in a very clear way.
Sure.
And out of the harmony comes the orchestration.
Okay.
The location of certain elements of the harmony. Where is the root of this chord? Is it higher register? Is it a lower register? How can I color the melody using different orchestrational tools? That kind of approach.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's see if we can dive into some of these tunes here and see if we can get even a little deeper into the approach here a little bit. Sounds good. We got into Kinetic. So you wrote Kinetic. It's actually it's an interesting story because, first of all, it's a killer way to start off the album. Like, it kicks it in strong. And to know that you wrote it for the drummer is like, I think is kind of an important component of that. Do you find yourself often writing for specific instrumentalists? Like, will people that you intend to have play like inspire the piece?
Yes. Yeah, always. And that's kind of one of the biggest elements of this band, actually, is that it is a real band. The fact that we had this residency at the Django is just a real blessing. In some ways, even like unheard of, actually, just in New York City to have a regular gig with a big band. I grew up. When I first got to New York, I was at the Vanguard almost every Monday night to check out the VJO, Dazzling and Center Orchestra, of course. There weren't too many other bands who had like regular hits in the city, and so I feel very lucky to to have had the opportunity to get the band working as an actual band. And
Sure.
so as a result, when I was writing the music over the course of that residency, I was able to mold it to everybody's sounds and personalities. So all of the charts on the record are written for, especially if there's a soloist, it's written especially like specifically for that person.
Interesting. And it really, I mean, it does make a big difference to have that opportunity to work with the same people and to feel out the way that they play and what might work for them individually.
Yeah.
What's the story behind Unveiling of a Mirror? It sounds like that's a very evocative title.
Actually, I wrote that piece for the first time that I was in the BMI workshop. Not that it's important, but I came in second place for that year. And that piece is written about a mirror in my old apartment, which was a crappy mirror. It like just was super foggy in the front, and like I would try and time my time. I just stand in like a specific space so that I could like actually like do the knot and like see myself doing it. And eventually just like standing in front of the mirror enough times that I just got to thinking like, what is a mirror? Like what part of this mirror is broken? You know, a mirror is a piece of glass with a sheet of metal behind it. And I'm not sure when exactly I started to think this, but I was like, okay, there's mirror land and then there's like real life. And what I see in the mirror, what I'm actually looking at is this piece of metal, which is reflecting me back to me. And I started to think, okay, well, that's interesting. I'm only looking at myself tying this tie. Like, what else am I seeing? And then slowly but surely, I started to enjoy looking at the whole mirror. Like, it didn't seem broken to me anymore. It just seemed like, okay, this is it. This is what the mirror is. So and then at some point, I was writing this piece. I started writing this piece, and I was like, what should I write this piece about? And I was like, tying my tie, and I was like, mirror. Okay, interesting. Like seeing things for what they are, seeing things for what they're not, seeing reflections rather than. I started to think, okay, what's the difference between a mirror and a window? And the only difference is that a window is a sheet of glass, right, that you can see right through, and a mirror is a sheet of glass with some metal behind it, which shows you a reflection. So the unveiling of a mirror refers to removing that sheet of glass, that sheet of metal, and just seeing things for as they actually are. And at the time, I was thinking about this quote: "Eyes are the windows to the soul."
Sure.
And I was like, okay, I just started to notice like a lot of, you know, I like to play around with words, just a little personality quirk, I guess. But I started to think, okay, like what about eyes? What if they were mirrors instead of windows to the soul? Maybe you see in other people what you want to see in yourself. And so the first half of the piece, the unveiling, before the unveiling, that's the first half of the piece, is like this kind of mysterious melody, orchestrated melodic figures in higher instrument groups. Well, first it starts in the baritone saxophone, the lowest member of the ensemble, and then transfers to flutes and trumpets and harmonies playing the same melody with low trombone harmonies below it. And over the course of the song, there is a moment like right in the middle where it goes into this groove, which turns the motif of the melody from the first half upside down, not retrograde. I think like it's not exactly negative, but it's akin to that. And so it's supposed to be the opposite. The mirror has been unveiled.
Oh, interesting. Sure. Then did you go into it? I mean, was that concept on your mind? I mean, the concept must have been on your mind to some degree as you do this, to really try to capture that atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. So that piece is a good example of like really, it's not quite programmatic, but it's a subject setting piece.
Sure.
That's written about a specific concept. Yeah.
Cool.
100%.
Yeah. So I caught your ASMAC presentation the other day, where you got to talk a little bit
Cool.
about the Sphinx
Yeah.
and the construction of that piece. So you started off with a particular mode, and then you built the piece off of that mode.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give us like a little overview of that process?
Sure. Yeah. So that piece was originally written for the completion of my master's degree at Manhattan School of Music in my composition degree. And I was just on the road a bunch and had barely any time to finish the piece or write the piece at all. So I actually wrote the whole thing in 36 hours for a studio orchestra, and talk about a deadline. Just had to get it done. So I was like, the only way I'm going to do this is if I really if I strictly adhere to some musical material. And so I came up with that mode partially as a way for myself to partially as a way for myself to like force myself to be limited to a certain amount of information, so that I could only, it had just eliminated certain possibilities, which would make it quicker to write.
Sure. Okay.
And of course the piece takes on its own personality, and then I just followed it. But that mode is written, it's kind of similar to it's not quite any you could call it like a B minor bebop scale maybe, but even so it's not really, because it's a 9-note scale that I intentionally wrote to have a good deal of chromaticism in the melody, so that triads no longer look like 1, 3, 5 of the scale, but rather like it's more similar to clusters. If you think about it, a triad is if we're thinking about like the home position triad, right? Root triad is root, skip a note, then you have the third, then you skip a note, then you have the fifth. If there's 9 notes, then that triad is crunchier and closer together, but our brains still recognize it as a triad if presented in a consistent modal setting. Without showing the music, it's a bit difficult to talk about the exact musical information, but the reason it's called the Sphinx is because there's a cadence from 4 to 1. It starts in D major, ends in G flat or F sharp, and it uses B minor as a pivot chord. And when it gets to B minor, right, B minor is the relative minor of D major, so there's a relationship there. And then B minor is the 4th degree of F sharp or G flat, so C flat, I guess, would be that degree.
Sure.
To be totally and harmonically correct. We are composers after all, right? So a perfect cadence is when you resolve from 5 to 1, and a plagal cadence is when you resolve from 4 to 1. So plagal cadence, it was around the time of Passover. I was just like, yeah, the Sphinx. Okay, cool. Got it.
Interesting. Okay. So it has more to do with the chord progression than necessarily the sound of, I guess it's all part of the same operation. One thing that I've found very interesting in a similar sense, I always feel that I say this maybe too often, but limitation breeds creativity, and the idea that if you can limit yourself to a certain palette in whatever capacity that is, it gives you the opportunity to really work with those concepts. So One thing that I was doing for a while is working with Ethiopian modes, which deal with their pentatonics. So there was a piece that I wrote a couple of years ago for the Ithaca College big band that was based on an Ethiopian mode, and you really have to think about harmony in a different way if you only have the 5 notes. And some of the Ethiopian stuff is very wide intervals between the various notes. So all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself, all right, well, I got to write, this is triads, but instead it's going to be a different approach. It's going to be almost structures or whatever.
Exactly.
And it's a good opportunity to try to work that out. Did you find as you go, did you say, all right, this is good as a foundation, but I'm going to abandon this at this point, or like I'm going to make compromises in this? Or did you really try to stick to the sort of foundation of the modal structure?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the question of inspiration. And I feel that I trust my inspiration to a T, to an I guess.
Okay.
And, like at a certain point, the music seemed to go in a different direction. And I felt that it would have been a disservice to me and to the piece to fight that direction. So I just followed it. But I don't view that as abandoning the source material. I view that as a continuation and an extension of the source material. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes the music can reveal things about itself that you, as the composer who's creating it, you can't necessarily see because you're too close to it. So I think about somebody like Beethoven versus Bach, right? Two very opposite composers. Whereas I think that Bach really followed the music, allowed himself to follow the music in a very linear way. And whereas Beethoven, I more often than not feel like he's just like imposing his will on the music.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
And saying like, no, you go here now. Ba, 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 ba. Whereas Bach's just like da, 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 and like tonicizes the same chord for ever.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
And so, not that I'm comparing my own compositions to either of those masters, but I do think that it's an interesting thought piece to think about those two seemingly like opposite sides of the spectrum of compositions, like where I find that like where I might lie on the spectrum on any given piece is different. Like how much do I want to like really make the music do what I think it should do, and how much do I want to just like focus and follow whatever the music tells me to do. So on this piece, I think that that actually, like the way that I wrote it, I'm allowing myself to, and I think this is probably true for other compositions as well, just like where am I on that spectrum during that piece can change at any given time. It's never here, it's never just there, it's fluid.
Sure. Do you feel like because this is a really interesting point, and it's interesting, I feel like every composer in some respect has a relationship with the music which takes on a life of its own, and it's a very ethereal kind of spooky element of it, that the music can be its own entity even in the process of being created. But we all know what that is. Like we've all been in that situation where you go, oh, this isn't what the music wants. Like it's its own thing, and it's not easy to maybe describe, but I think it's easy to feel as you're going. But do you have a piece that you feel like would be a good example of you imposing your will more on the music, or let's say an opposite piece where you said this thing almost wrote itself?
Ironically, I do feel like the Sphinx wrote itself.
Okay.
I think that with the exception of the first, not even the introduction, I feel like it became clear to me what it should be after I wrote the whole piece. I wrote the introduction, the very last thing that I wrote. Mm-hmm. But after I wrote that opening melody, measures 9 through 25, measures 9 through 25. After that, that's me just being like constructing a very, very careful melody that hits some key points of the scale and harmonically is supported by triadic figures that arise from the modal landscape. The rest of it piece is on its own. I'd say the Unveiling of a Mirror is a piece where I really forced it to do something.
Okay.
That I wanted it to sound a certain way. I wanted to have that juxtaposition of the melody presented in two opposite ways,
sure,
polar opposite ways, to represent the concept that I was thinking of, which is the unveiling of the mirror, reflections versus seeing through. There's got to be a fancier way to say that, but I just can't think of it right now.
Sure. No, I get it.
Yeah, cool.
Well, that's something else. Now you've got, let me think if there's anything else on that. I think it's an interesting approach, and it's interesting the way that you can just take different, let's say, processes will yield different results in so many different ways. And it's as composers, it's like, okay, every piece has to be a new experience as both as a composer and as a listener? And what ways do you find that, you can get into these different realms? And one of them is just to have, all right, let me start with a mode and go with that, or let me start with a concept and go with that. It's the creative process in and of itself is always sort of the most fascinating thing to me. It's like a primal human thing that everybody takes in a different way. And I think it's what, draws us back to this all the time. You got, I think, 3 covers on here, 3 arrangements of tunes. Until the Real Thing Comes Along, Nika's Dream, and On the Street Where You Live.
Correct.
Were those pieces that you'd arranged for the band and you said, all right, this is just going to be, I like these tunes, I want to do them? Or is there a particular reason that you chose those tunes to put on the album?
Nika's Dream is, I'll start there because it's an instrumental cover. That's an arrangement that I've written for my septet. We recorded that on my album Peace and Time. And Benny Benak and I are the 2 soloists on the septet CD, along with Jimmy on drums, Jimmy McBride. And so 3 of us are in the big band. And I just wanted to feature everybody. It felt like, that actually, along with The Long Gone, I wanted to have some sense of like a tie from one record to the next.
Okay.
The big band seemed like a cool opportunity to expand on some of those ideas. And so Nika's Dream is one of the was at the time one of the more recent arrangements that I'd done for the record. And I decided I wanted to play it on the record and then put it on the record.
Sure. Yeah.
Until the Real Thing Comes Along and On the Street Where You Live were 2 requests that were given to me by vocalists along the years, saying that I whenever I would have a new vocalist sing with a band, I would always ask them, as sort of a thank you for singing with us, I would just say, I'd love to write you a new arrangement. Is there any song that you'd like to sing? And they would say this song. And so the arrangement of Until the Real Thing Comes Along is just like a really kind of at the time I was checking out First Love Song, Brooke Myers' chart on First Love Song. And so the intro is somewhat akin to, like, in terms of melody and orchestration, akin to Brooke Myers' introduction to that piece. And then it goes into and I remember actually it was like the night before the gig, and I was writing it, and like I'd asked a couple of days before, like, hey, what key do you want to sing this in? It was originally I originally wrote it as a male vocal chart, and I've been writing it in E flat, because that's just like I'd listened to a bunch of like male vocal versions, and that seemed like the average. So I thought that would be okay, and so the intro was written in E flat, and then I get a text saying like, yeah, let's do it in A major. Like, okay, sounds good. No prob, bro.
Yeah.
It's like a crafty turnaround, like start at 1-6-2-5 in E flat, C minor, and then just like slide down into B minor for 2-5 into A major. And that actually kind of gave the piece, when I wrote that gave the arrangement a nice feel, because it was shocking, right? And actually the subject of the song, Until the Real Thing Comes Along, like if how much I love you isn't enough for you, then I guess I'll just have to wait until the real thing comes along.
Yeah.
It's kind of the subject of the song. And so actually that cadence seemed to work in a really interesting and unexpected way. And I am glad that I didn't know the correct key until the very last second.
Yeah, sure.
And Veronica really just sang out of that song.
Yeah. She sounds amazing, man. It's beautiful.
She really does. What a marvelous musician. She really just took the arrangements and made them her own. So On the Street Where You Live, that's another example, I feel, where I'm kind of imposing my will on the music.
Sure.
I wanted a darker take on the song. I was like, you know what? At the time it's 2019, 2020, right? Like I wanted, it's not cool to be a stalker anymore.
Right.
If it ever was. And that's kind of the story of the song. If you allow yourself to have that perspective on My Fair Lady, like that can be a perspective. It's like, you know what? It's not cool. She said no, like back off.
Sure.
And so I wrote like this march arrangement. And yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it gives the piece a very different character. And I feel as though every time I hear an arrangement that brings out a different character in the music, it forces you to really re-examine what the lyrics are, what the meaning of the song is. And that's one where I was like, all of a sudden, because I've heard that song a million times, but then listening to that arrangement, I had to think like, wait a minute, what is this about? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a very different approach to doing it. And it's interesting. I was, again, it's really it's sort of a decision to make whether you want to try to really imbue a certain emotion or a certain concept into the music, or whether it's just like, that'd be cool to do it that way, as opposed to the alternative or whatever. But you were really thinking like, I'm going to bring out a different side to this piece that people aren't always thinking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was preconceived and forced upon the music.
Sure. That was pretty good. Let's see. I don't know if we don't have to get through all of them, but I want to try to catch. So Wollongong is another one from your septet recording, right? What's the process involved in turning the stuff from a medium-sized group to a big band? Is it kind of already in your head and you can do it, or like, you just sort of reinterpret it with the big band, or how do you go about thinking about that?
The big band just allows for more opportunities in terms of scoring stuff out. Just there's in my septet there's 3 horns: trumpet, alto, tenor, and then guitar, which I oftentimes refer to as the French horn of the jazz ensemble. And either flexibly be a part of the rhythm section or a part of the horn section. So I feel that my rhythm section either has 3 or 4, and my horn section either has 3 or 4. But either way, when expanding to a big band, that's nowhere compared to the 13 horns in the section. So there's just more possibilities. So with Wollongong, I think actually, I learned to say it wrong. It's a place in Australia that is called Wollongong. It's a beach, a town that has a beach, rather.
Gotcha. Were you there? Was that the inspiration for the song?
No, just randomly came across it. Liked the look of it. Wrote a piece about the water and the ocean, respect for
cool.
nature. So basically, in this recording, Andrew Gould is like this surfer who slowly but surely, like, almost gets engulfed by this wave of drums, Brian Carter, and brass, the section.
Sure.
And makes it out unscathed. And then, we, there's a longish journey, and then there's a totally new section at the end, which I perceive as just like the sunset. You're just like lying on your back, like in the ocean, just like floating around, and just peaceful, relief, those kinds of words versus agitated, powerful, those kinds of words for the first half. And yeah, so the process of expanding it, the melody stayed the same, the harmony globally stayed the same, although I did incorporate the flute in a way that allowed me to accentuate some of the overtones of the harmony in a different way than I was able to in the septet arrangement. And Alexa Tarantino is on flute. And actually, like, while I'm chatting about this, I should mention that when Alexa joined the band, there was a shift in the band, and then when Jennifer Wharton joined the band, there was a shift in the band. And when Jennifer joined the band, it was like about a couple of months into our Django residency, I just like immediately felt this shift, like, yes, this is the band.
Nice. Yeah.
And when Alexa joined the band as well, it just opened up some really interesting possibilities to write and orchestrate for the flute. She's obviously a great saxophonist. Not obviously, I think she's a great saxophonist. But she really is just an incredible flautist. And having the ability to use that texture in such an unrestricted way really opened up some possibilities for my writing. And it's, she's featured on Movie's Dream as well, with some flute parts, on Closure with some flute parts, and on Wollongong as well, just like sitting all the way on top of the ensemble. And Word Travels Fast as well, but Nika, Andrew Gould is also on flute there. And
Yeah, there's some amazing
he's
woodwind
an amazing
writing.
flautist too. He's really, that's the thing about the saxophone section. I mean, the whole band, I could just talk about them the whole time. Honestly, I love everybody who's in the ensemble. The Kinetic band is just I feel it's like really a family vibe, and yeah, I mean that the whole saxophone section.
Yeah,
maybe I'm biased to be talking about Alexa because she's my fiance, but Andrew Gould, obviously, just like one of the baddest of our generation in New York City right now, I think, or in the world. Alexa, Lucas Pino, Sam Dillon, Andrew Gutaskis, all of those people have really given me, and everybody else in the band too, has just allowed me so much flexibility in terms of what and how I can write for their instruments, because they're all so virtuosic.
Sure. Yeah, counts for a lot. And to know that they're going to be a consistent band and that they're going to be around, and to create that kind of familial atmosphere means that it gives you a lot to work with, because you're dealing with not only the instrumentation and the timbre of the instruments, but the personalities of the people in the band.
Yeah, exactly. And not just their musical personalities, but also their human personalities. And maybe those two things aren't actually that different. I tend to think that they're not very different.
Sure, I'd agree.
Yeah, that's kind of what goes back into the fact that or the perspective rather, that I really feel that this is a family vibe of people who came together to be a part of a band rather than a group of the who's who to record an album.
Sure, no doubt. Yeah, I think that's an important part of the whole experience. Man, I'll tell you something else that I find really interesting is that we take the big band format from the, 20s and 30s and 40s or whatever. And over the years, even though the music has changed and evolved, and there's been so many contributions from so many different angles, the foundation of the jazz orchestra has remained the same. And there's so much you can do with it. I mean, the difference between a Count Basie chart and a Bob Brookmeyer chart and a John Hollenbeck chart is pretty substantial. And yet you still have the core of the group, the sections and the approach is going to be the same thing. I mean, the way that you can color the band, it's an interesting thing. I mean, do you think about maybe when did you start writing for big band, and what is it about the big band that is so compelling?
I don't know what it is about the big band that's so compelling. I just remember being a kid and hearing a gigantic sheet of sound and saying, like, how does that work? Where do all those notes go? What is this harmony? I love harmony. Yeah, I first heard big band when I was in middle school. My piano teacher, or actually at elementary school even, I think I was 8 or 9 years old. My piano teacher bought me a bunch of albums. She bought me McCoy Tyner's Soliloquy, McCoy Tyner, The Jazz Roots, McCoy Tyner, Infinity, and Count Basie, the Atomic Count Basie, which is hefty orchestrations. And yeah, and I was just hooked. I experimented writing for big band when I was in high school. I'm pretty sure they were highly unsuccessful expeditions, but they were written nonetheless and provided a good first time.
Sure.
Got to get it out of the way at some point.
Yeah, well, I think that unsuccessful is relative, man. But if you're working on the process in the beginning, I mean, that's a big deal, especially in getting started in high school.
I'll be careful not to show you those recordings. You figure out what works and what doesn't work in various stages of your life, and you figure out like what orchestrational textures support your melodic and harmonic ideas. Maybe the trumpets are not the instrument group to play a low chord, for example. Those kinds of things. Even though they can play some notes, like give it to the trombones, give it to the saxophones, something like that. Give it to a combination of everybody.
Yeah.
But I just remember that teacher who I mentioned, her name's Susan Capestro, probably my most influential music teacher I've ever had. We still keep in touch to this day.
That's great.
She played in a big band in the Boston area, and she would invite me to come play in the big band. Like she would say, like, hey, why don't you learn 2 of these charts that we're playing, and then you can come sit in with the band.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I was just hooked.
That's amazing. Where are you from?
I'm from Lexington, Massachusetts originally.
Oh, okay.
Boston area. What about you? Where are you from?
I'm from Newburyport.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So not too far, yeah.
Yep, not too far. Yeah, I know. Lexington's got such a program, man. It's heavy. I didn't know you're from Massachusetts.
Yeah, it does have a really amazing program.
Yeah, I know Malcolm Campbell, and it's a whole bunch of people that came out of that. Josiah Reebstein, the tubist, and a lot of people. That's amazing, man. So you grew up in the Boston area. What was your teacher's name again?
Her name is Susan Capestro.
Okay.
She was a former student of Charlie Banakis. Or maybe she was a student of Charlie's while I was studying with her. Yeah, she's awesome. I attribute a lot of who I am as a musician today to her. Just our early lessons were really not so much piano lessons as they were composition lessons. They just disguised it super well.
Yeah, sure. So you've been composing for almost the same amount of time you've been playing the piano, or it's been sort of an intertwined approach.
Very intertwined. Yeah, I'd say, my mom was my first teacher starting when I was about 4 years old. And then I had another teacher, a Russian piano teacher named Lena. And my mom walked in one day of her just like slapping me on the knuckles with a ruler. And she's like, my child is 6. Don't do that to my child. And so I got a new piano teacher, and Susan just was where it kind of settled. And
Right on. What was the big band that you would go see in Boston? Who was she playing with?
I don't know the name of it. I think it was a reading band. I don't know if it was a performing ensemble. But when I was in high school, I started working with the Beethoven String Orchestra, which is where I met Katie Thoreau and Matt Whittick. And actually, Matt Whittick, I think I met Matt before I started playing with Beantown. Matt was the student teacher at Lexington High School when I was there, and he either strengthened my relationship with Beantown or got me involved. But anyway, that was like my first professional, like real pro experience, was playing with the Beantown String Orchestra. I remember I had the piano chart in front of me and just like had my eyes on the brass section, being like, how are they doing that?
It's unstoppable, man. You got to have having that introduction to the music and having a sort of visceral, connection to what's actually going on is worth as much as any education you can have, I think, in that, at that age. And it's great she brought you into that world and was like, you got to check this out, man. This is heavy. You know what I mean? Like, that'll last with you, stick with you forever.
Yeah. Incredible.
And I think there's also, I like to give Boston its due. I'm a little biased, but I
Boston
feel like
bias.
Yeah, people go there for school. People go to Berkeley for a couple of years or whatever, but don't really get into the scene. But it's such a rich music scene, especially with the fact that you've got all these kind of super high level educators. But I think growing up outside the city, for me, certainly was a big deal because, we would go in on Monday nights and hear the Fringe at the Lily Pad or whatever, or we would go in all the time and check out different groups. We'd go to NEC and hear like, okay, Yuri Kane's running some ensemble of students or something like that. When I was in high school, it was like a big deal to be near all of that going on and get a feel for what's happening. Because it's totally eye-opening to hear all this different stuff. Of course, it's true. Probably, I'm sure it's true if you live outside of Philadelphia, or it's probably true if you live, there's probably some great musicians in Lincoln, Nebraska or whatever. I don't know, but Boston in particular, I feel like has such a vibe, and it's useful to be in that position when you're a kid and really get to feel that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So you came from Boston, you went to New York. Where'd you go to? You did undergrad and then grad school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, moved to New York in 2009. Got my undergrad degree from NYU. Graduated in 2013 with a major in jazz studies and a minor in economics.
Okay.
And I studied with a number of people. Don Friedman was my first teacher there. Brian Lynch was an early teacher there.
Mm-hmm.
Jean-Michel Pilk and Gil Goldstein. And Gil Goldstein has become like a lifelong mentor of mine. And really cherished that relationship. And, when I graduated NYU, I wasn't 100% sure whether I wanted to be a full-time musician.
Mm-hmm.
thought maybe I could try and do something with my economic spec. I wanted to wound up going through a couple of interview processes at BlackRock and Bain Capital in Boston,
Mm-hmm.
and deciding that if I didn't try to do music now, then I never would.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of steered the ship in that direction.
Sure.
I steered the ship away from the economics world for a short time. Wanted to see if I could make a living being a musician.
Mm-hmm.
Was blessed with a couple of really amazing opportunities earlier on in New York City after I graduated, which allowed me to pursue artistic ventures and feel financially stable. And after a certain amount of time, I said to myself, okay, probably not going to go into econ, at least in terms of investment banking.
Sure.
Let me, I have some holes in my orchestrational knowledge that I really want to fill. I had always wanted to work with McNeely. I was getting opportunities to work consistently as an arranger orchestrator, and just found that I was having questions that I couldn't answer,
Mm-hmm.
and that recordings and buying scores and studying scores can only do so much. You at some point have to work with a master.
Sure.
And McNeely was that master. I forgot to mention that Dave Pietro is a close mentor of mine as well. He
Mm-hmm.
was actually not just my professor at NYU, but he was also my all-states conductor when I was in high school.
Okay.
And we played some music by Maria Schneider and by Jim McNeely. We played Extra Credit. And I remember listening to Extra Credit before we got to the first rehearsal for that band and being like, oh my gosh, this is like a symphony. This thing is crazy.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, the first thing that Jim talks about during our first composition seminar at MSM is Extra Credit. He's like, yeah, guys, so I want to talk to you about form today. So here's this piece I wrote, Extra Credit, and I'm like, like over and over again, just like mind blown from what he's saying. And so I attended MSM from 2016 to 2018, got a master's degree in jazz composition,
Mm-hmm.
studied with Jim and Mike Holliber, and here I am.
Here we are.
2021.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. That's great. So you've got this record came out on Outside In. They've been doing a lot of great stuff, man. They've been putting out a lot of great music, and it's amazing. And now you've got some new music in the works. You're ready to record.
Actually, yeah, I've got music in the can that's I've been saving up for some time. I've got a couple of projects that I'm going to be releasing music from. I'm actually releasing the earliest recordings of my big band that I initially put out on YouTube. I'm releasing that as a record on La Reserve record label, coming out on October 1st, which is called Prologue.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And I've got, and then I've got I thought the title kind of fit.
Sure.
I recorded some trio stuff with Dan Chmielewski and Brian Carter, who are two of the musicians in the rhythm section from Kinetic.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is called The Role of the Rhythm Section. And those are two albums on the near horizon.
Okay. And those are recorded? Those are all recorded.
Those are all recorded. And then as far as new big band stuff goes, actually when we did the Kinetic session, we got 16 tracks down. And can't fit 16 tracks on a record.
Sure.
I had to choose. And so I've got another 6 tracks that I'm sitting on and I'm going to add to put out another record. Probably sometime next year, late 2022. And then one thing that I'm super excited about, actually, we're recording for it right now, is I co-lead a band, started an ensemble with the great lead trumpet player, Bijan Watson, who you might know from the Clayton Hamilton Orchestra, you might know him from Monkestra, you might even know him from La La Land.
Okay, yeah. Also, the Ein Incerto Jazz Orchestra in Boston.
Yeah, of course, in Boston. Yeah.
Yep.
So Bijan and I started a band called the Generation Gap Jazz Orchestra, and we are recording this month, over the course of the next month. And we've got some exciting people who are in the band. Bijan is lead trumpet, Tanya Darby Mike Rodriguez, Danny Giannacucci make up the trumpet section. John Fetchhawk is lead trombone. Javier Nero, Julia Vandever, and Jennifer Wharton make up the trombone section. The saxophone section is Alexa Tarantino, Christopher McBride, Tom Lure, Roxy Pass, and Lauren Sevian. And the rhythm section is made up of Ulysses Owens Jr. on drums, Dan Chilinsky on bass, Will Graham on guitar from LA, and I'm playing piano. Then we've got a couple of exciting special guests as well, who I can't announce just yet.
Okay.
But super excited. Yeah, as if there's more special guests to be had. So
it's pretty good.
So I just finished writing the music for that, and we are recording, as we speak, actually.
Right on.
So that's kind of what's coming up on the horizon for me.
Right on. Now, a couple things. When you recorded Kinetic, how long did it take you to do? How many sessions did you do? Because it obviously helps to have the band is already rehearsed. So you could rehearse it, but if you've already played the tunes a lot, you have the opportunity to kind of knock out a bunch of stuff at once. But what was the process like? Yeah,
we did have a long rehearsal for it's different playing a gig and having a rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
So like how I like to present the concept of the album is that it's the feeling of a live gig with the polish of a studio record.
Mm-hmm.
So I just totally lost my train of thought. I apologize. How long was it? It was two days long.
Okay.
We had 2 full days of recording with a full band, and then we had some local days to record the vocals.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure. And so you got 16 tunes out of it, and you chose these 10 because they fit the flow of the album, or what was it about these 10 that? Worked?
Kind of what I went into it thinking is like, okay, we're like I actually had a list of what I wanted to go on the record already, which is this collection of tunes, and but I thought to myself, okay, like if we have time to record extras, then I'll just choose which ones are the best and put those ones on, whatever that means, the best.
Sure.
And eventually, and then what happened is that I just loved all of them. So I was really blown away. Everybody played their butts off. Everybody just put their all into the music.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cool.
Yeah, awesome. So if people want to follow, so you got a bunch of stuff that's about to come out. People want to find it. You got your website. Where else can they follow your trajectory here, your new releases?
Yeah, my website is the best way. Joining the mailing list from the website is probably the best way. My website is www.stevenfeifkemusic.com. Steven is spelled with a V. Feifke is spelled F for Frank, E-I, F for Frank again, K-E. And then you can also follow me on Instagram at Steven Feifke, on Facebook at Steven Feifke Music, and on YouTube at Steven Feifke.
Great. Well, congrats again, man, on the new album. That's great. And I'll be looking forward to hearing
Thanks very much, Bobby.
Hearing what else comes out, man. It's going to be awesome. It's great.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for doing it. Right on. All right, gang. Thanks for sticking around for another fun-filled episode of Jazztopia. Big thanks to Steven Feifke for coming on the show and talking about his new album, Kinetic. Be sure to pick up a copy through Outside In's website, or you can check out Steven Feifke's website. You should also make sure to follow him on the social medias and keep up to date with his upcoming projects. Well, if you like the show and you want to stay up to date with us, you can follow us on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Jazztopia podcast. You can also find us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever else you get your online radio-style entertainment. Be sure to leave us a nice review, and that's a big help for us. And tell your friends if you like the show. You can also follow me on Instagram at Bob Spellman, or on Facebook at Bobby Spellman Music, and I'll keep you up to date with what's happening with this show and everything else. All right, gang. Well, it's been a lot of fun. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. See ya.